This is the Dallas Morning News.
Hello and welcome to this week's edition of SportsDay Rangers. I'm John Blake.
And I'm Evan Grant.
So the Rangers open a 3-game series in Boston tonight as they continue their very road-heavy June. This road trip, Kansas City and Boston, and we talked to Evan. He's in Kansas City.
I've been on both sides of the Missouri state line here over the last week. So far in June, so good. You know, they won the first 2 series of the month in St. Louis and then back at home against the Guardians. We'll see what happens when they get to Boston this weekend. But again, this continues a stretch of games that's largely against teams below 500. And it's an opportunity, John, if the Rangers can play well on the road for an extended period, for them to really gain some momentum heading into the part of the schedule that will be exceptionally home-centric.
And after the road trip, the Rangers will play their final homestand here in June when they take on 2 teams that are struggling fairly mightily, the Minnesota Twins and the San Diego Padres.
Yeah, and then they have another 9-day road trip. It's been quite the sojourn. Anyway, our guest this week's episode is a guy who started his career in Boston, a former Rangers outfielder and current Rangers Sports Network analyst David Murphy. Murph came up with the Red Sox in 2006 out of Baylor and came to Texas when the Rangers sent Eric Gagne to Boston in 2007 in a trade deadline deal.
And the Red Sox managed to win the World Series even after making that trade because, as we've talked on this podcast, I was with the Red Sox at the time. It was not one of Theo Epstein's better deals. Eric Gagne was kind of a bust in Boston. But anyway, on the archives in Arlington, we're going to talk a little bit about hotels. The famous, I guess it was famous, legendary, I guess is a better word, Sheraton Arlington met its demise this past week, and we're going to talk a little bit about road hotels and Evan's excursions, a little bit about being on the road and over a very long career.
Very long. So long that when you walk into clubhouses now, guys look at you and say, "Oh, you're still doing this?" Anyway, you can reach out to us on X with any Rangers questions or comments. I'm at Evan_P_Grant, and he is at Ranger Blake.
Bottom of the ninth, bases loaded. Here comes Jimmy Dale from Baker Brothers Plumbing, AC, and Electrical.
Thanks, Chuck. When your home pitches curveballs, Baker Brothers knocks it out of the park.
Home run, Baker Brothers. Incredible.
As the official home service partner of your Texas Rangers, we're offering $300 off a tank or tankless water heater.
Another winning call. Visit callbakernow.com or dial 214-342-1171 today.
Baker Brothers.
Great service.
So, Evan, despite everything, and the Rangers are again within a game of 500 here. They're going to try to get to 500. I believe this will be the 7th time they've tried to do this. If they finish off this series in Kansas City on Thursday afternoon, they're still only 2 games. Now they're 2 games out in the AL West. They've won 8 of 11, but after the game on Wednesday night, where the Rangers won 6-4 in 10 innings, you said you just can't figure this team out. So, what is your summation, and what were you trying to get at there, Evan?
Yeah, I just don't know what this team's identity is. It's hard to figure out, and sometimes good teams win when they play poorly, and Wednesday night's victory seemed to be something of that ilk, where the Rangers won in spite of themselves, because once again, a starter failed to get through 6 innings. As they go into this stretch where they're playing 23 games in 24 days, they really need some length from their starters. As we record this on Thursday afternoon or Thursday morning, 5 of the last 6 games, they failed to get through 6 innings. Then on top of that, you add an extra inning for the bullpen on Wednesday night, the 10th. And it's the bullpen's pulling a lot of innings right now, and so that's something that has to be watched. Mackenzie Gore has got to be more efficient and got to put guys away with 2 outs and 2 strikes. I think Kansas City scored 5 of its runs over the first 2 games with 2 outs this series. And the Rangers have allowed, I think it's, the sixth most runs in baseball after there were 2 outs. So that can't continue. Offensively, the Rangers had the bases loaded 4 different times, John. 4 different times.
But they had a couple of bases loaded walks. I mean, they had 9 walks in the game. They created traffic, but you're right. They're still not really getting that really big hit. Elias Diaz came up huge in the 10th inning, and Jake Berger, had that big sacrifice fly and came off the bench yesterday, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's still, it's like they're creating traffic, but they just can't seem to get that big bases clearing double.
And I think that's the thing that's missing. I guess if I'm trying to put it into words, it's like this killer instinct, right? The killer instinct that a championship caliber club has, that when they smell a win, they know how to put it away. And it doesn't ever feel like a game is a certainty very often for the Rangers. So that's something I'd like to see them do more of. Again, we have to go back to this. It's still been 4 or 5 days since Corey Seager and Wyatt Langford have come back from the IL. They're still finding their way a little bit. But you can't expect that Josh Young is going to be as hot as he's been in the first 2 months all year long. You can't expect that Zeke Duran is going to continue to be at this level all year long. He's going to hit some kind of slump somewhere along the way. And so, when you've got guys playing well, you need to take advantage of it.
So, talking about that a little bit, and Seager, he's got, again, you're right, he's only been back, he's played, 4 games, I think, 4 or 5 games since he's been back.
Played 4 of the 5 games.
4 of the 5, that's right. Are you seeing anything different? I mean, is it something that Ranger fans should be concerned about at this point? I mean, we've been talking about this now for almost 3 months. And without Corey Seager in the middle of that lineup, it's very, very difficult to put together a consistent offensive performance.
Well, you can put together an offensive performance. It's just got to change its whole approach. Last night, Seager did take a walk and battled for a 9-pitch walk in a big situation that helped load the bases. But that was an opportunity there with a couple of runners on where you really need Corey Seager's bat. I don't know if the back is going to be something that is a continual issue this year. Whenever a guy gets a back issue, you always wonder if it's going to be chronic. So I don't know if that's something that the Rangers are going to have to manage, but we're nearly halfway through the season here. What are we, 67 games in as we record this, and Corey's still hitting $180. It's just simply, it's not Corey Seager. It's not the Corey Seager we've known. So there's got to be a turnaround. And, if you believe in the numbers and the course of the career and the track record, the second half is going to be red hot. I just haven't seen anything at the plate so far that suggests this is a guy who's about to get red hot. Though he did hit a ball hard. He did hit a ball hard last night. And he has hit a couple of balls hard. He just hasn't had any results.
Well, it's pretty, if anything is determined or obvious here in the first part of the season, that Skip Schumacher really likes versatility. And last night he gave Ezekiel Duran a start at first base, and he explained it that with this stretch coming up, where the Rangers have, I believe, 1 off day in 3.5 weeks, he's looking for that and playing Duran. But that versatility has really kind of helped the ball club here over the first 3 months. Duran being able to play multiple positions, Nicky Lopez coming up and doing that. I'm assuming when Josh Smith comes back, that will be his role. So that does play big into this team. Having a set lineup at least has been very challenging here to date.
Yeah, it has been. And look, when you've got Langford and Seager out for a significant amount of time, and your number one utility guy out, you've got to have some versatility. And Ezekiel Duran has given them that. Nicky Lopez has given them that. In the short term, Michael Hellman has given them that. And Skip is, I think, much to his credit, Skip is a big believer in getting his entire bench involved. And I think that's why the Rangers, in my opinion, have gotten better offensive performances from their bench players than they have in recent years because they've found ways to get them more regularly involved.
And you talk about the starting pitching, and it was so consistent and so good last year, 1 to 5, basically. I mean, for the most part. What do you? Kumar Rockers pitch well, but Gore. But you're right, Gore, Evaldi, even Jacob deGrom having trouble really giving them, 6+ innings on a consistent basis, and the bullpen has done a miraculous job to kind of hold it together. But what needs to happen there?
I mean, it's just that, John. You've got to get quality starts out of your rotation. That was supposed to be the strength of this team going into the season. With Evaldi, deGrom, and Gore, you were going to have a top 3 as good as any in the league, and those guys have got to get through 6 innings consistently. Jack Leiter and Kamal Rocker have been very serviceable young pitchers. Rocker's on a very nice stretch right now. But you have got to get your veteran pitchers giving you 6+ innings every time out. I think with deGrom and Evaldi early in the season, yes, there was some wanting to kind of a slow burn up, right, to build them up, particularly with deGrom. Evaldi has pitched 6 innings, I think, in 9 of his last 11 starts. But the rest of the guys just are not getting through 6. Their pitch counts are too high. And look, Evaldi on Monday or Tuesday, he had 70 pitches going to the 6th inning. He just lost it and was hurt a little bit by Evan Carter not making 2 catches in center field on balls that Evan said yesterday really should have been made. It just poor reads, and I think on one of them he got a little tentative going into the wall, and on the other, I think he felt like the ball knuckled on him a little bit and he got turned around. So, maybe that one was more happenstance and coincidence than anything else, but they've got to get regular 6-inning outings against these teams that, quite frankly, right now don't have the deepest, most powerful offenses in baseball.
Right, and you mentioned that, and how important here is it for the schedule? We talked about a little bit here at the top. Going to Boston, Fenway Park is never a great place to play, but the Red Sox have been awful at home this year. And then coming home to play, the Twins and the Padres, who are kind of reeling at this point, and then going to Miami. After that road trip gets a little tougher with Toronto and Cleveland, but it's again, we've talked about this a lot this year, stretches of the schedule where, the Rangers have got to take advantage of this. And, if they win today, it will be 4. If they win on Thursday, as we tape this, they will have won 4 consecutive series. But, they have really got to try to put some ground here, try to stay within shouting distance of the Mariners, who have not been tremendously great either.
No, but they've been fairly hot of late,
Right.
and that you feel like they are going to get better. And the same things that we're sitting here saying about Corey Seager, you figure on whatever Mariners podcast that Tim Hevley and Randy Adamack are hosting up in Seattle, that they're saying the same thing about Cal Raleigh.
Right.
So, I think that this team, the Rangers, have less margin for error than do some others. We have not talked about the lack of depth for the starting rotation. The Rangers have had basically one emergency start. That was by Jacob Latz on the second day of the season. There were 2 other openers, there was one bullpen game when Evaldi missed a start and one opener ahead of Kamal Rocker. They've used 8 total pitchers to start games. And if they were to miss a starter, if deGrom or Evaldi or any of those guys went on the IL for any period of time, who are they turning to in the minor leagues right now? What are their
Probably Cal Quantrill, right? I mean, but he hasn't been stretched
would probably
out
be
then.
the guy, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. So, I mean, Jordan Montgomery is making progress. Hopefully Cody Bradford is now starting to really turn a corner again, but it's been 2 years.
Right.
But the Rangers don't have that depth to turn back to on the pitching staff. Same thing applies in the bullpen. Who are you turning to now? You've looked at Robbie Alstrom, you've looked at Gavin Collier, you've gotten yeoman's work from a guy who came out of the independent leagues,
Right.
and Peyton Gray. But where are the other bullpen arms going to come from in the system if you need them? And so my point is there's not a whole lot of room for error or injury here. And the Rangers need to capitalize on the ability to beat teams that they should beat.
Well, let's move on. And our guest on this week's podcast is David Murphy, former Rangers outfielder, now a member of the TV broadcast team on Rangers Sports Network. And when we talked to Murph earlier this week, he had some great insights on hitting left-handers as a left-handed hitter, on Jacob Latz, and some really good thoughts about the ball club. So we'll talk to Murph next. Well, our guest on this week's edition of SportsDay Rangers, David Murphy. Of course, everybody knows Murph played in the big leagues from 2006 to 2015, 1,100 games with the Rangers from 2007 to 2013, and now one of the members of the Rangers Sports Network broadcast team. Murph, thanks for taking some time today with us.
Yeah, always enjoy it.
So I'm just going to throw it out. I mean, you've seen the last two series going into Kansas City. You were in St. Louis. And then for the game this week, on Sunday, as we record this on Monday, against Cleveland. And kind of seen the Rangers on both sides. Just kind of overall, before we kind of get into this a little more, we've close now to 70 games through the season. What do you see of the 2026 Rangers?
I mean, I don't know if anything screams World Series champion right now. But at the end of the day, if your backbone is going to be your pitching staff, which it is for pretty much any team, when you've got DeGrom, Eovaldi, Gore has been a little bit inconsistent here and there, but the stuff is there for a left-handed arm, and then same thing for Leiter and for Kumar Rocker. All of these guys are capable of getting out and performing, on a playoff type of stage and have the stuff, in my opinion. The offense, like any team, it's going to come and go. I think all of us could say, especially after the last few seasons, maybe it's been a little bit inconsistent, but we just saw Seager and Langford return. Jock Peterson's gotten hot at the right time. If you're dissecting the lineup, when Seager and Langford returned the other day, you've got Jake Berger hitting 7th. You've got Evan Carter hitting 8th. And so just looking 1 through 9 at the depth of the lineup, I feel like it's pretty encouraging. So, like I said, they're going to have to earn their way into the playoffs. They're not like a Dodgers type of lineup combination with their pitching staff. But I think it is a possibility that they could get into the postseason. And then we all know once you punch your ticket, you never know what happens.
Yeah, it's, what's amazing to me is as we sit here today, on Monday, on the off day, I'm just looking at run differential, and the Rangers have the third best run differential in the American League, which is amazing. They're at a plus 14. It's the third best run differential in the American League, behind the Yankees at plus 96 and the Mariners at plus 29. And so how the story goes, right? Is if you've got a positive run differential, you should be a winning team. They aren't to this point because of the inconsistencies of the offense. But Murph, do you feel like this club, which manufactured some runs for a while, I don't expect them to be a big run manufacturing team with Seager and Langford. Do you feel like it's positioned to be a little bit more complete now with that bottom third of the lineup?
I would say so. You've got guys like Higashioka jumping in on the action when he gets time. He had a big game there in St. Louis last week. And he'll, go on a week or two tear where he binges some home runs. So things like that can be helpful because, at the end of the day, as an offense, you're just trying to wear that opposing staff down. And 7, 8, 9, when those guys are hot, that just makes it incredibly difficult on an opposing pitching staff. So would love to see, and I think all Rangers fans would love to see Evan Carter get hot. It's been really cool to see Ezekiel Duran and his breakout. That you could say there would be times over the last 2 seasons where you might not think he would be part of the Rangers organization anymore. They stuck with him, and it's really paid off. So yeah, 100%, it's possible, and things are taking shape, right? And I think I would love to see what we've seen this past week or two as well. It just seemed for the first few months we couldn't get the offense and the pitching staff on the same page. It seems so frequently when we were pitching, we weren't hitting. And then as inconsistent as the offense has been, when the offense would decide to have a solid streak, then it would be a time where we weren't pitching. So it seems like those two sides have synced up a little bit more lately.
Murph, you mentioned Evan Carter, and he's playing elite defense, and you were a left-handed hitter. I think you still are a left-handed hitter if you decide to get in the box. But you went through some of the. I'm looking back at your splits. I mean, your splits weren't as wide as his are right now. But what do you think Evan Carter's got to do to be more of an offensive? I don't even say threat, but more of an offensive complementary piece.
Yeah, I haven't had conversations with Evan about this, so I don't want to put words in his mouth on what he's thinking and feeling. At the end of the day, and I'll say this too, like the type of arms that he's facing from the left side are better overall than the ones that I faced. And not only are they better, but they're teaching all of these guys pitch tunneling. And, if you're a sinker slider guy, that pitch looks the same on the way to the plate longer than it did in my generation. So, yeah, he's got a bigger challenge. And talking about my splits, I didn't really hit for power against lefties. I could go up there and I could have a good professional at bat. And every now and then I might get a start against a guy like a David Price or something like that. Sure, I'd probably strike out a little bit more. I think at the end of the day, when you're talking about a matchup like that, it has everything to do with the hitter staying square. And what I mean by that is you talk about either your front hip staying on the pitcher as long as possible, staying towards center field, or even, you talk about a guy like Jake Berger, whether it's a lefty or righty, he kind of has that step in the bucket kind of mechanical approach, right? Well, he can be successful. John, you were with the Red Sox for a while. Dustin Pedroia was notorious for doing it as well. So you can have that step in the bucket type of approach as long as you keep your upper body square to home plate, square to the pitcher. And I think that's the one thing that's really noticeable, is that front side just flies a little bit when he tends to face lefties. Maybe it's because he doesn't get those opportunities very much, and it's just an uncomfortable type of at bat. And any hitter will have that, whether it's a specific matchup, whether it's a specific pitcher. Eventually, you just have to commit to it and go for it. And I would love to see him just get more opportunity. And that's going to come with the Rangers lineup doing better, right? So if we're up by 4 to 7 runs later in the game, or even down by a good margin later in the game, he's going to get more opportunity. And hopefully when he gets more opportunity against lefties, he'll get rolling. But the track record so far to this point in his career just hasn't been a good one.
Murph, the teams you were on back, we had a lot of slug. I mean, back in those days, we had Nelly Cruz, Josh Hamilton. We had guys that could stand, multiple guys in that lineup that could put the ball into the seats. This team, struggles with that a little bit, and as Evan calls it, small ball. I'm not sure I like that name, but trying to do more to score runs and bunt a little bit. How do you see that team kind of develop that here over the last month? How has it improved?
Yeah. Well, whatever you want to call it, I would say from a guy that loves the purity of baseball, like it's awesome to see them manufacture runs and capitalize on the little things. So in St. Louis, there was a particular night. I think Higashioka was hitting 8 and Nicky Lopez was hitting 9. And I believe both of them squared to bunt and both of them didn't get the job done. And they were facing Riley O'Brien, who is the Cardinals closer. The numbers against his slider, I want to say the first appearance that he had in the series, opponents were 0 for 19 against his slider. His fastball was up to 100. Higashioka did not get the bunt down. And then he slaps a single to right with 2 strikes. Nicky Lopez comes up. He doesn't get the bunt down. But he ends up seeing 7 pitches. And then Jock Peterson ends up going to get a 100-mile-an-hour fastball down and out of the zone. And then the Rangers go on to score 2 more runs after that. So they built themselves a 3-run cushion. What I loved about it is, even though in those particular situations, and I want to say 1 or 2 of those runs were scored via the sac fly. So you're talking about doing little things to manufacture runs, right? I think when you square to bunt, even if you're unsuccessful, I think it puts a level of pressure on the pitcher that it just you're doing something offensively where you're creating stress out there, right? And I already referred to that. Your job as an offense is to put pressure on the opposing pitching staff. So I love seeing it. The day before, maybe it was the first game of the series, Danny Jansen was at first base and they try to hit and run and they swing through the pitch. And Danny Jansen, I think, had 1 career stolen base to that point. So they swing through it. Danny Jansen ends up stealing the base. Good things happen when when you have that aggressive mindset, when you're trying to manufacture runs, when Skip Schumacher is putting on signs. So I think more than anything, rather than be a station to station defense, hey, let's try to do little things on the bases. Let's put some calls on, whether it be a bunt or a hit and run, and take our chances. And for the most part, it's worked out in their favor here recently.
That night as well, I think there was a point where Osuna squared the bunt, didn't get the bunt down, and then tried to slash a ball, which I really liked.
That's right. Yep.
And there was also, I don't remember if it was that night or the next night, but Carter broke for second and shut it down on a stolen base attempt, which I think everybody was a little bit confused by. But what I liked is on the next play when he did run, or on the next pitch rather, got a wild pitch. And that to me was maybe, again, the sign of pressure, that you're making teams try to do a lot. And Murph, over that 5-game winning streak, I think there were 6 occasions where the Rangers either reached on an error or advanced on like a wild pitch pass ball kind of situation. Those are the things you're talking about. And when we get back to Evan Carter, and I want you to address this a little bit, because I put pressure out there for him to bunt more, and lots of people want him to bunt more and use his legs. You can talk a little bit about, it's easy to say guys should bunt more. It's also something else to talk about confidence in being able to do it, especially when you haven't done it at the major league level very much. But this is something that he could add to his game potentially to ward off some of these long cold streaks, is it not?
Yeah, I think so. Especially, and you're not always looking at this as a player, but say he's hitting 8th or 9th and it's a day where they're facing a good pitcher, there's likely a chance where Evan's only going to get 3 at-bats, especially if we're playing matchups, right? And they bring in a lefty late in the game. There's a chance he's only going to come to the plate 3 times. If one of those is a bunt attempt, and if he can squeak out a hit, a 1-for-2 day with a sac bunt, that's a really good day, right? Especially when you're trying to build some momentum. It is difficult. It can be difficult. I would think it's more difficult as a young player. I think I did bunt more later in my career, but after you've had some success, I don't know. I wouldn't say it was a matter of all the early work I did, although Gary Pettis and Ron Washington had me out there a ton, and over 3,000 career plate appearances. I probably didn't even bunt 10 times in the course of my career, but once again, that's why you go through those early work opportunities in spring training, is those few times that you're called on to bunt in your career, you're ready to do it, and you don't look like a deer in headlights. I'm not saying that's what Evan looks like, but I'm just talking about the preparation, the work that goes into it, right? So yeah, would love to see those opportunities, especially now, like I said, if everybody stays healthy, if this is the lineup right now that we're envisioning, and Evans hitting 8th or 9th or lower in the lineup, that's a must from a guy. You've got to be ready to do the little things when you're hitting in those spots in the lineup.
And the more you show that, right, the more you show that you're going to bring infielders in and you're going to have them on the move. And then it becomes a little bit easier as you get more comfortable handling the bat to be able to slap a ball past the infielders, if you can get the ball on the ground. So
If you lay down a good bunt also, big leaguers are not immune from that ball ending up down the right field line, right? We saw it ourselves as a defense in the Astros series.
One more for me on this year's Rangers team, and it's a bullpen question, and the role now that Jacob Latz has. I mean, what do you see from that? I mean, it's pretty amazing what this guy has done, coming from basically a kind of a non-prospect back in, we brought him in to pitch that one game in Cleveland in the middle of the COVID in 2021, but a guy that's really taken a role here. And the way Skip has used him here with 2-inning saves and in real crucial roles, how do you see the end of that bullpen looking here as things go on?
I guess you could draw some comparisons to the lineup. Maybe, or even you could say the lineup on paper, you would expect to even do more, but hats off to this front office and this coaching staff for putting this bullpen together that, there weren't lofty expectations coming into this season, and they have overperformed in so many different ways. Like
again, right? They did this last year as well.
Yeah. I mean, you love the way that how quickly Jacob Junis works and the way that his stuff plays. Latz is a guy that you mentioned. When I had the chance to do the national game on Peacock, and we were doing our pregame interview in Skip's office, and that was one of the questions from some of the national people, like, who's got the best stuff in your bullpen? Who's got, the best fastball? Who's got the best breaking ball? Who's got the best changeup? And across the board, Skip just couldn't stop talking about Jacob Latz. His fastball, it gets on hitters, it plays up, it has natural cut. The changeup's really good against righties. He's got a breaking ball to go with it to get lefties out. So I think what you mentioned, John, going back to that outing that he had in Cleveland, and then even up to a couple of years ago, I remember a game he was actually pitching pretty well. He comes in a big spot in Milwaukee and gave up a grand slam to Rhys Hoskins. So I remember some difficult moments that he's had. He's been up and down a little bit. He's been back and forth between the rotation. I told him a few weeks ago, I said, man, if there's anybody that I want to see have success, it's you, because of the way that you go about your business. You're quiet, and you're just keeping your head down and going about your work, right? And I love the way that he has said publicly, I want to be in those high leverage moments. Like a lot of players don't necessarily put their money where their mouth is, and he's done that. So I love his quiet presence. And then even say like a guy like Jalen Beeks, he came in a big situation last week and got 2 big strikeouts, and I believe he threw an inning and 2/3, so he got out of a big jam there. And there's definitely guys that I'm forgetting, but just up and down that bullpen, there's guys that are getting the job done.
Yeah, and that's the thing. You mentioned this with Latz, and I'm glad you mentioned it, but he is an easy guy to kind of pull for because of how team-centric he is. how dedicated he is to his craft, how willing he is to do multiple roles. Because let's again remember, this is a guy who had 4 shutout innings for Jacob deGrom as a starter. He and Mason Miller are the only guys in the big leagues right now with 4 saves of more than an inning. And 3 of his have been 2 innings. And the one other guy that I know it was just you run through so many names, but Peyton Gray is another guy that's
Yeah.
just easy to pull for, especially this guy who's doing it with his changeup and his background story. So yeah, I mean that bullpen once again has overperformed. And if you look at it, you go back to 24 and what the Rangers did with Kirby Yates and that group, and they overperformed in an underperforming season. Last year they overperformed in a rather underperforming season, and this year they're doing the same thing. So the only thing on Jacob Latz for me is that the Rangers have to be careful on how often they use him for these multi-inning rules. He's done a great job, but he's also, this is his first year as a closer, and it even Skip Schumacher said, we've got to handle this very, very carefully. So, Murph, I want to talk to you about one thing, and I couldn't bring it up in St. Louis. I just couldn't, because we were spending too much time talking about skydiving for one, which we want to get your thoughts on. But I went back and I looked when we got home. Since 2011, you played 3 games there in 2013 when the Rangers swept the Cardinals. But what was it like for you to be back in that clubhouse? Do memories come flashing back? Like, how do you view all of that now?
Yeah, what are we? We're 15 years removed now. So, and that was the second trip back. I did the St. Louis series 2 years ago. That one was
That's right,
a little
okay.
different, I think having been there once previously, that one kind of helped to soften the blow a little bit. I have mixed feelings on how I talk about this because, one, as a player, you're an ultimate competitor, right? And every kid that wants to be a Major League Baseball player, that's what they want to do the most. They want to win a World Series. And we were so close and we didn't get it done. You go back to the previous year, 2010, like we were never really close, right? And I'll try to be quick and concise here because I feel like I could fill the rest of our time just with this question. I can look at it from the standpoint of, I played golf with Michael Young probably 4 or 5 years later, and I thought he put it into a great perspective. He said, think about all the players in the history of baseball that were never even in that position. Like we were in a position to win a World Series. We had our shot and we just didn't get it done. And I don't remember the exact words. I'm paraphrasing, but it was basically like I can live with that, right? And I thought those were that put it in perspective a little bit. But and I think in the same way, I kind of think, how would my life be different today? Would it really be like, would it have added years to my career personally, or even a year? Would it make people look at me differently because I was a World Series champion rather than a World Series runner-up? But goodness, like I will say there was a point in time during the pregame stuff where they were showing highlights of the 2011 World Series. They were showing the freeze triple and then the freeze walk-off. And when I see that type of stuff, it does make me a little bit sick to my stomach, right? Just the competitive nature of the game and what it was to be an athlete. I don't think it's not something that I think about very frequently now, having been retired for 10 years. But then, walking those corridors to the clubhouse, and I think about the stories of even my wife telling me that the families were ready to rush out on the field and my daughter was heartbroken because she had gotten to pour ginger ale on my head after winning the ALCS, and she wanted to do that so badly. So just there's so many different aspects, to it that I'm definitely still a little disappointed and maybe still a little heartbroken. But at the end of the day, like, it is what it is in the game of baseball, and you're going to have triumphs and you're going to have failures. And even though it was a huge failure, I'm glad that I had the opportunity to be on that stage and be in that position to begin with.
It's funny you mention your wife, because like for me, the enduring visual, like when I walk the corridors of Busch Stadium, I don't for the listeners, I don't know that they understand this. You take an elevator down, and it's one of the longer walks to the clubhouse for media. You have to kind of wind past the Cardinals clubhouse and then past the club, and you get there. And after Game 6, as the media was going down to the clubhouse, it was nothing but a procession of disappointed Rangers personnel that
Yeah.
was lining that hallway because they were all expecting to be on the field, and we're walking past them, and they all have this just ashen look on their face, and the wives, the club officials, everybody. That's the thing that flashes back through my mind every time I'm in that stadium making that walk. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because it really is. And I know you were in the clubhouse, not in the hallway, but it really is kind of visceral when you think about it, to really have that same kind of flashback.
And I'll say real quick too that, like, as heartbreaking as Game 6 was, there was no part of me that thought we weren't going to come out the following night and win Game 7. And the part where things started to turn a little bit, we got the early lead, right? And then Freeze, of course, he hit a big double to answer in the bottom of the first. And we knew that these guys, regardless of how much fight we had, they were going to have just as much or more. And they just, man, whatever magic they had, it played out in both Game 6 and Game 7.
And we won't talk about the day off and the canceled, postponed
right.
game without the rain and all of that. But anyway,
Yep.
Murph, this has been great. Your insights, and I really enjoy watching you on the broadcast. And it's been really cool to watch the way you've kind of grown. I don't know if grown's the right word, but into a really solid analyst. And it's you and Dave Raymond are a good combination. And so whatever small role I may have had in that, it's been very satisfying.
I have to echo that.
Well,
I've told you that
appreciate it.
before,
I
Murph, right?
don't know
just
if I
love you have a very calm demeanor when you're describing the game, and it's very conversational, and I appreciate it very much.
So with that, we'll let Murph
Well,
go. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say I'm still appreciative of the opportunity. I still remember, John, when you approached me. I think it was at Jared Sandler's off-season, charity event, and you asked me if I'd be interested in doing it, and I was actually a little bit surprised. And I was like, absolutely, I'd be interested. So it's been fun to just have the opportunity. Dave is great, and just learn that side of the business. And I can only imagine how many players would still love to be employed and involved in the game of baseball. So I don't take it for granted when I show up at the ballpark that I can still call that my office.
And you guys have fun doing it too, and I think that's a big part of it, and it comes across on the air. So Murph, we appreciate it. We'll see you on the next homestand, and well, thank you for the time. It really is. This was a great conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it, guys. I always love talking baseball with y'all.
Well, that was a great conversation with David Murphy. Like we talked, Evan, he really has developed into a really solid analyst. And Murph didn't talk that. He was a great, as a player, always very accommodating, but I'm not sure I ever saw him in that role. But he really does know the game and can really communicate it.
Well, he was always very approachable and always had
Right.
great answers, but he was always a complimentary piece on a team,
Right.
again, with Michael Young
Right.
and with Adrian Beltre and with Elvis, and those guys all really overshadowed, and then obviously with Josh Hamilton, and those
Josh,
guys
yeah.
all overshadowed the great majority of media time.
Right. So on the archives in Arlington this week, this was kind of a sad week for some of us who've been around a long time. This past Saturday, the old Arlington Sheraton / Marriott / Sheraton, it was a Marriott for a while, Arlington, was imploded at the age of 41. Rest in peace. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about, because Arlington's hotel visiting teams stayed at that Sheraton, Evan, as you remember. It was basically across the street from old Arlington Stadium, and wasn't that far from the ballpark in Arlington either. The old joke was at the old ballpark that for a writer, it was closer to go from the hotel to the visiting clubhouse than it was to get from the press box to the visiting clubhouse at Arlington Stadium, because there was no good way to do that. You had to either go outside the ballpark or go down through the stands. It was not a good situation. But just looking at this a little bit, and the Rangers moved to Arlington in the fall of 1971. There was not a lot in Arlington at that time, certainly not a full-service hotel. And, the traditional clubs and most clubs would stay, and most ballparks were downtown. Few of them were outside, but even in Anaheim, there were hotels, right, around the ballpark you could stay at. Arlington didn't really have that. So in the first year, in 1972, teams actually did stay at the Roadway Inn, which is still around on Division Street, because there really weren't a lot of other hotels in Arlington. There was a Six Flags hotel, but they were all motels. And even back then, teams did not like to stay at motels. It was not a big thing. So, you okay there, Evan?
Yeah, fine.
This is tearing you up?
Yeah.
And so that lasted for a little bit, and then everybody went to Dallas. The Anatole opened, the Hyatt Regency opened in the late 70s, and teams stayed there. So it was there because there just weren't any full-service hotels in Arlington. The Arlington Hilton opened in 1983, which is about 2 miles, from the old ballpark, and then the Sheraton opens in the end of 1984. But, again, the Sheraton was convenient, but it was also the closest hotel to Arlington Stadium, so you had a lot of fans would stay there as well, right? So it became, in the early days, clubs put up with it, but it became a security nightmare for teams. The Oakland A's are the ones that really, in the late 90s, when they were basically a touring rock show with, rock star show with Henderson, Canseco, and these guys, and it kind of became a nightmare. So eventually teams started to move to Las Colinas and Dallas, and teams haven't stayed in Arlington for a long time, and we'll see if they don't stay at the Lowe's at this point. It's just probably a little too close, but and the CBA now says you have to stay in 5-star hotels, which these hotels in Arlington at the time certainly were not there. But
yes.
What do you remember anything about that Sheraton or anything being
No,
close?
I don't remember anything about that Sheraton. I did when I was in Shreveport. For some reason, I was in. It was either a Cowboy game or somebody was playing North Texas, and for some reason, I stayed at that Hilton. And all I remember about that night is I actually went down to the hotel bar and got a drink, which, as you know, for John, is not all that common for me. I don't know why.
Right. Your times in hotel bars are few and far between, but there've been a few.
But there was a lady who wanted to strike up a conversation with me. And even then, and I was in my 20s, even then it became very clear to me that this young lady was there on business and not just strictly attracted to me. And so that deal was not consummated. But I do remember that. That's the one thing I remember about staying in Arlington. Never had any real time at the Sheraton. There were still some writers who stayed at the Sheraton until a few years ago. And when it was really hot in Arlington, I'd give them a lift to the ballpark. Now, when guys come in, because we're all slaves to the Marriott chain, they stay at that Courtyard, or they'll stay at a Marriott in town somewhere. So it's just not it's not the same.
And that was a Marriott for a while, and it became very popular with writers and everything when it was a Marriott. So
writers like free stuff.
Right, they do. And one quick Hilton story, and I may have told this before, I think I probably have, back in 1988. The Yankees, actually the New York Yankees, were staying at the Arlington Hilton. This was in May of 1988. And if you remember Billy Martin, this was the night that Billy got beat up at Lace, which was a gentleman's club a couple of miles from the Arlington Hilton. And unfortunately for Billy, George Steinbrenner was on this trip, and he was staying at the Hilton. And really unfortunately for Billy, a fire alarm went off while Billy was, I guess, getting beat up and everything, and they evacuated the hotel. So the writers, the players, Steinbrenner were all in the parking lot of the Arlington Hilton when this cab pulls up to the hotel, and Billy stumbles out. He's bloody and everything, so he couldn't even discreetly get in the hotel, and it became a huge story. Billy's version of the story was that he got jumped. There were several other versions, but that was probably the best Arlington Hilton visiting manager story, and I think that was the last time the Yankees stayed at the Arlington Hilton. I think they quickly moved to either Dallas or Fort Worth. And again, for high-profile teams where fans would stay at these hotels, it was hard.
I'll share one other hotel story, and then we'll be done with the archives. But
thankfully,
this goes back, and I was reminded of this when we were in St. Louis last week, because what used to be the Adams Mark in St. Louis is now a Hyatt, and it sits very close to the memorial, the arch, the Gateway Arch. And in 1995, the year that started late, I was covering the Marlins. And we had all gone through replacement spring, and no matter what club you were with or what club you covered, that was just a ridiculous exercise. Marlins got off to a terrible start that year. Afterwards, I think they were 5-25 at one point in time. And the last trip before the All-Star break was to St. Louis. It was 95 degrees. I've never been hotter in a stadium than I was at Busch Stadium. It was
this was the old Busch Stadium.
Busch Stadium, artificial turf, 128 degrees for a day game there, in which the late former Ranger Terry Matthews pitched and beat Rick Sutcliffe on a day when, believe it or not, Tony Randall from The Odd Couple threw out the first pitch because he was doing a revival, and it all just was so ridiculously stupid. And that night, for some reason, and you know how rare this is in this day and age, the writers, the players, and the coaching staff all ended up at the hotel bar at the Adams Mark. All of us ended up getting very, very drunk. My favorite line of the night was John Burkett, former Ranger and former guest of the show, was talking to a young lady who, and everybody who knows John knows he's a very mild-mannered guy, doesn't look like a big-time athlete. And the lady did not believe that he was a baseball player. And she said, "Are you a baseball player? Then how much money do you make?" And John, who used to use the word waffy to describe being a little bit inebriated and was quite waffy at that moment, said to her, "Let's just put it this way. I'm happily overpaid." The night ended with one of the writers in a bar, a topless bar, not me. It was not me. I ended up in my room where the room was doing ellipses.
Spitting, yes.
Yes. One of the writers ended up in a topless bar in East St. Louis, Missouri, and was kicked to the curb. And another ended up being escorted off of the property when he had fallen asleep at the base of the Gateway Arch. So it was quite a night. And that was also the last time I remember being quite inebriated, and for good reason. But that is my favorite hotel story of all time.
Well, that's a good one, and we could go on and on with hotel stories, but we're not going to bore you with this. So that's this week's episode of Sports Day Rangers, and thank you to David Murphy for joining us this week.